30 seconds after the challenge formed, no one advanced. The room did not erupt, no voices were raised. Those who were present would later agree that the outcome was clear almost immediately, though no one could explain precisely when it became so. Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali remained where they were, unchanged in posture and expression. The men who had come prepared to test them did not retreat in panic or defeat. They simply stopped. What ended the moment was not force but recognition, and once it arrived, nothing further was required. The room was not arranged for spectacle. It was a training space used regularly, shaped by repetition rather than preparation for any single event. The floor showed the wear of years, smooth in places where footwork had passed countless times. Heavy bags hung along one wall, unevenly spaced, their leather darkened by use. The air carried the faint scent of sweat and canvas, not fresh, not unpleasant, simply familiar. People moved through this space without urgency. Some were stretching, others spoke quietly in pairs. There was no sense of gathering, no anticipation that anything unusual was about to occur. It was the kind of environment where challenges rarely begin, because nothing invites them. Bruce Lee was already there when most arrived. He did not take a central position. He stood near the edge of the room, observing without focus on any one person. His posture was upright but unforced, weight balanced evenly. There was no visible tension in his movements, no preparation that suggested expectation. To those who noticed him, he appeared present but unoccupied. Muhammad Ali entered later, accompanied by a small shift in attention. This was not dramatic. It happened quietly, almost instinctively. Heads turned briefly, conversations softened. Ali's public presence had trained people to react before thinking. Still, he did not command the room. He acknowledged no one directly, offering neither greeting nor dismissal. He settled into the space, as though it required no adjustment for him to exist within it. The two men did not immediately engage with each other. They shared the room rather than each other's attention. Any familiarity between them remained unexpressed. They were not there to demonstrate partnership, nor to perform alignment. Their proximity felt incidental, not arranged. Witnesses would later emphasize this point. There was nothing in their behavior that suggested anticipation. No stretching beyond what was routine. No rehearsed movements. No indication that they were about to be tested. The room, for all practical purposes, remained ordinary. Authority often announces itself by reorganizing space. People shift, positions change, attention narrows. That did not happen here. Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali allowed the room to remain what it was. This in itself was a form of control, one that required no effort to maintain. The absence of ceremony mattered, because when the challenge later emerged, it would do so without invitation, and when it did, the room would already have been measured, quietly, thoroughly, and without urgency. Nothing had happened yet, but the conditions had already been set. Authority in that room did not rely on introduction. It emerged through contrast. Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali stood apart not because they demanded distance, but because distance formed naturally around them. This separation was subtle enough that many only noticed it in retrospect. Bruce Lee's attention remained broad and unhurried. He did not watch the room as someone was waiting to respond. He observed it as someone who already understood its limits. His movements were economical, almost incidental. When he shifted his weight, it appeared to be for comfort rather than readiness. Those close enough to notice would later say that nothing about him suggested confrontation. Ali's presence operated differently. Years of public recognition had shaped how others responded to him. People adjusted their voices, their posture, their path of movement. Yet Ali himself did nothing to encourage this. He neither acknowledged the attention nor resisted it. He accepted the space as it was given and made no attempt to shape it further. What bound the two men was restraint. Neither filled the silence with commentary. Neither sought engagement. Their authority came from an absence of need, No need to explain, to impress, or to prepare publicly. This lack of assertion created a quiet hierarchy that required no agreement to exist. Several fighters in the room took note, not consciously, and not all at once. It appeared first as a glance held too long, then as a pause before resuming movement. Some recognized Ali immediately and measured themselves against reputation. Others noticed Bruce Lee without name or context, responding instead to posture and composure. There was no clear line dividing observer and participant. The room functioned as it always had, yet something had shifted beneath the surface. The presence of these two men had altered the conditions without altering behavior. This kind of authority is difficult to challenge because it offers nothing to confront directly. Witnesses later struggled to explain this phase of the moment. Nothing occurred that could be quoted or described as decisive, and yet, by the time the challenge emerged, the outcome had already begun to form. The room remained calm, but calm does not imply neutrality. It can also indicate control that has not yet been questioned. The challenge did not begin with a voice, it began with alignment. 12 fighters who until then had been dispersed throughout the room began to occupy the same side of the space. This was not coordinated by signal or instruction. It happened through recognition. Each movement adjusted to the one before it, until the pattern became visible. They were not inexperienced men. Their bodies carried familiarity with training and contact. They stood with the confidence of those accustomed to being tested and, more often than not, prevailing. Their approach was measured, not rushed. No one sought to provoke a reaction prematurely. Conversation in the room thinned. The ordinary sounds of training faded into a low background rhythm. People became still without being asked. Some stepped aside, others remained where they were, uncertain whether they were witnesses or obstacles. The space narrowed without changing shape. Bruce Lee noticed the shift without responding to it. His posture did not alter. His gaze did not fix on the approaching group. If anything, his attention seemed to soften, widening rather than narrowing. He did not square his shoulders or reposition his feet. He remained where he was, as though the room had not changed. Ali registered the movement differently. His eyes followed the line forming across the floor. He did not step forward. He did not retreat. His stance remained relaxed, his weight settled comfortably. Those who watched him later recalled that he appeared neither amused nor concerned. He simply observed. The fighters closed the distance gradually. Their numbers created a presence even without contact. This was not meant to intimidate through aggression, but through inevitability. In many rooms, such a formation would have been enough to establish dominance. Here, it stalled. The absence of reaction disrupted the sequence. The fighters expected acknowledgement, some sign that their presence had been registered as a challenge. What they encountered instead was neutrality. The room did not reorganize itself around them. The two men they faced did not adjust. Witnesses later described a moment of hesitation, not fear, but recalculation. The formation had been built on expectation, and that expectation had not been met. Momentum slowed as the group reached a distance where action would normally follow. The test had formed, but its outcome was no longer certain. What resolved the moment did not resemble an exchange. There was no clear beginning and no visible conclusion. Those closest would later say they were unsure when it happened, only that something had shifted and could not be reversed. One of the fighters adjusted his position slightly forward. It was not an advance meant to initiate contact. It was the kind of movement used to test response, to draw a line without crossing it. In many situations, this alone would have prompted a reaction. Bruce Lee responded without signaling response. His body adjusted by a small degree, a change so restrained it appeared incidental. His feet did not leave the floor. His posture did not tighten. The movement aligned him in a way that altered distance, angle, and access all at once. To those unfamiliar with such details, it would have looked like nothing. There was no strike, no sound beyond the ambient noise of the room. Bruce Lee's hand made brief contact, not as an action, but as a clarification. The touch was light and controlled, applied and released before it could be identified as force. It was not a challenge. It was corrected. The fighters stopped. Not because he had been restrained, but because the conditions had changed. The position he intended to occupy was no longer available. His balance was intact, but his advantage had disappeared. Continuing forward would have required escalation without purpose. Ali remained still throughout. He did not intervene or reposition. His presence functioned as confirmation rather than participation. Those watching understood that nothing more was expected from either man. The room absorbed the adjustment almost immediately. The tension that had gathered did not break, it dissolved. There was no reaction to follow, no second movement to interpret. The demonstration ended because it did not seek continuation. In less than half a minute, the test lost its meaning. What remained was clarity. The kind that leaves no argument and no opening for reply. The change that followed was internal before it was visible. No one issued a command, no one declared an end. Yet the energy that had carried the 12 fighters forward no longer had direction. It lingered briefly, uncertain, then began to recede. Posture shifted first. Shoulders that had been squared relaxed slightly. Feet that had been placed with intent adjusted back into neutral positions. These movements were small, almost involuntary, but together they signaled a shared realization. The moment for action had passed. What collapsed was not courage, it was an expectation. The fighters had entered the test believing that escalation would clarify the hierarchy. Instead, escalation had been made unnecessary. The absence of resistance removed the structure they relied on to proceed. Bruce Lee did not observe the change, at least not visibly. His attention returned to the room as it had been before the formation began. This withdrawal of focus was decisive. It communicated that the situation no longer required awareness, let alone response. Ali's stillness reinforced the message. He remained composed, unengaged, as though the challenge had never fully materialized. His refusal to acknowledge the moment denied its significance. For the fighters, this was disorienting. Without recognition, there was nothing to confront and nothing to conclude. Silence settled into the space, not the tense silence of anticipation, but the quiet that follows resolution. People who had paused now resumed small movements. Someone adjusted a bag, another shifted position along the wall. Normal activity returned without discussion. The fighters stepped back individually. There was no coordinated retreat. Each man made the same decision at roughly the same time, guided by the same understanding. Remaining would serve no purpose. Advancing would only expose imbalance. Witnesses later noted the absence of reaction. No relief. No satisfaction. Just a quiet acceptance that the room had returned to its original state, altered only by what had been recognized. The lesson had been delivered without announcement, and because it had not been emphasized, it could not be challenged. In the years that followed, the moment was rarely described in detail. Those who had been present found that specifics were difficult to hold on to. There were no clear sequences to recount, no decisive action that could be isolated and retold. Instead, what endured was an understanding, quiet, persistent, and difficult to dismiss. When the incident surfaced in conversation, it did so indirectly. Someone would mention the room before mentioning the men, the stillness, the way nothing appeared out of place until it was over. Only afterward would Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali be named, almost as an afterthought. This ordering mattered. It reflected how the moment had been experienced, environment first, recognition second. The fighters who had formed the challenge did not speak publicly about it. Not out of embarrassment, but out of clarity. There was nothing to defend and nothing to dispute. What they encountered had not opposed them. It had simply rendered opposition unnecessary. Over time, that understanding influenced how they approached other spaces, other confrontations. For some witnesses, the memory altered their sense of authority. They became more attentive to posture than proclamation, to presence rather than position. The incident offered no lesson that could be quoted, only one that could be applied. It changed how they measured situations before acting within them. Bruce Lee continued on his path without reference to that day. There was no attempt to preserve it as an achievement. It fit seamlessly into a broader pattern already visible to those who watched him closely. Efficiency without display, restraint without hesitation, control without dominance. Ali, when asked years later about moments like it, often redirected the conversation. He spoke of timing, of awareness, of knowing when nothing needs to be proven. He did not recount the incident. He did not deny it. He allowed it to remain where it belonged, in the memory of those who had learned from it. Over time, the story became quieter rather than larger. It lost detail but gained weight. It was no longer an event to be described, but a reference point, a way of understanding how authority can exist without announcement and resolve without force. And that is how it remained. Not as a tale of confrontation, but as a moment when no one dared move, not because they were stopped, but because they understood why they did not need to.